This is the Analysing Anfield podcast on the Blood Red channel, bringing you the best tactical and statistical analysis of Liverpool FC.
Hello and welcome to Analysing Anfield, your tactics and analytics podcast courtesy of the Blood Red channel. I'm Guy Clarke, maybe not the voice you were expecting to hear, with Josh Williams away this week, recharging his batteries ahead of the new season. Fear not, though, on hand to provide expert analysis, as always, is Dave Hughes. Dave, I think this is where I ask you about your haircut. How are you doing?
I can see you prepared, Guy. Well done. My hair's fine, mate, and I'm doing well. And I'm trying to adjust to your southern accent compared to, the quite gristly, Scouse accent that I'm used to from Josh. But glad to have you, mate. Glad to have you on the show.
Yeah, to host game the Blood Red podcast and now Analysing Anfield. I'm not producing you guys, but Josh away, I've thrust into the host's chair, and hopefully I don't embarrass myself.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? Because you are actually always on the show. You're just, a silent ghost almost, listening in and judging, but not saying anything. And then we normally have to explain our conversations after, where you quiz us and question us on our opinions. Normally when we bring up Arsenal.
I'm not just firing in on like the WhatsApp, as you say, it's irritating you guys whilst you're doing the pod. But anyway, we'll see how we get on today. Coming up, we'll be looking back on the Community Shield game with Arsenal and looking into and how crucially and why the game played out as it did, I suppose, ahead of the new season. Is there cause for concern for Jurgen Klopp's side? How Klopp did, in fact, change things up and eventually break through against Arsenal, and whether or not the Reds do have maybe a new hero who's emerged from the shadow that the penalty shootout defeat may well have cast on the game for Liverpool. All of that, plus to change things up a bit this week even further, not only have we a guest host in myself for the podcast, but we'll also have our first guest on the podcast, as well-known scout and analytics expert Lee Scott, author of King Klopp, Rebuilding the Liverpool Dynasty, will also join us for the second half of the podcast. But Dave, without further ado, let's kick off then and look at the Community Shield game. And, well, what did you make of it, first and foremost?
Yeah, I'll be honest, Guy. I was a little bit surprised at how it played out. People who were listening and watching last week to me and Josh would have known that we predicted a Liverpool win. Beyond the obvious, in that I think Liverpool are, the superior side. I also think that they had better preparation. They'd had a longer pre-season. They played two tougher games, Stuttgart and obviously Salzburg, really good kind of pre-season opponents. Arsenal, on the other hand, had only had the one, hadn't they, against NK Dons, which was maybe just 4 days before the final. So I just expected Liverpool to have too much. The game went as we expected. They tended to dominate the ball, dominate territory, but obviously the scoreline didn't go to plan. And I think, if we're being honest, Liverpool just struggled a little bit in terms of creating chances.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there was, as you say there, a bit of a cause for concern about how Liverpool did sort of struggle to break Arsenal down a bit. As you say, I think Mikel Arteta actually in his press conference ahead of the game said that Arsenal had only had maybe as many as 3 sessions together, whereas Jurgen Klopp has spoken about this pre-season, albeit truncated. He has actually been able to have his whole squad together. They've been in Austria, and as you say, things, I suppose, even early on, Van Dijk had that goal ruled out for offside from the free kick. But bar that, Liverpool at times did look a bit sluggish and looked as though they were trying to get their rhythm and get into the game. Arsenal got a fairly early goal, and that really sort of seemed to give them a bit of a boost.
Yeah, exactly. Liverpool had a lot of the ball, but I thought it was a fantastic goal by Arsenal. Okay, there was some questions of, well, it depends what camp you're in. Some question Nico Williams, but he's a young lad. I think he probably could have done with a little bit of support on that flank when getting, stood 1v1 with Aubameyang. I think Klopp even referenced it afterwards, where he said, we left Nico out there on his own. He did, and it was a really difficult position for him to be in. Aubameyang's world class, great finish. But yeah, Liverpool just did seem I think you used the term then, sluggish. We look at the XG. for the first half, it was, I think just for the first half alone, it was 0.51, which is for the Liverpool side is really low. If you look at the kind of XG time chart, it was really neck and neck between both sides. Okay, Arsenal didn't create a lot, but they had chances. They converted one, and I thought Alisson pulled off a really good save for the other. And yeah, it was just very, very toothless, I have to say. It just wasn't really what I expected from Liverpool, from an attack sense at very least.
And I suppose two players in particular always sort of seem to torment Arsenal for Liverpool, being Roberto, Firmino and Mohamed Salah. But Salah, for large parts, really was a bit of a bystander, wasn't he? He didn't really get into the game. And I know when Josh is here, he often likes to call him an output merchant. He gets the ball, he dribbles with it, he shoots. He just didn't get a chance to do any of that. Was that Liverpool, I suppose, as we already referred to, being sluggish, or more maybe Arsenal? And do Arsenal maybe deserve a bit of credit in how they've set up under Arteta? They're very compact and they are rigid and tight to try and play through. But at the same time, I think Liverpool and Liverpool fans would have been expecting more of the side.
Yeah, well, I think we're starting to, and we'll maybe come on to this in a little bit more, but we're just, for a while now, we've been talking on this show, about potential issues, certainly this season, for Liverpool in breaking sides down as teams get more accustomed to how they play. Most people now can kind of summarise in a few sentences, how Liverpool are. They know the formation, they know the threats, they know what they like to do. And it seems a lot of sides are starting to enjoy, kind of sitting in low block formations and just not giving Liverpool much space in behind. Now, I think normally, if you've got a full strength side, so I'm specifically thinking about Trent Alexander-Arnold on the pitch. Normally with him there, it creates, a bit of a multifaceted attack where if the front three are being kept quite quiet, there's normally threats from other areas. But obviously he wasn't on the pitch. And I think Liverpool just having to try and break down a well-organised side, which is something we did last week about Arsenal. We said, it's still early days in Arteta, but some things you can probably say that we've definitely seen already is a lot more organisation compared to what Emery had there. And we saw that, they're happy to forego possession, even though the side who like to keep the ball when they're up against Liverpool, they're happy to forego possession, sit in. And I think that doesn't suit Liverpool's attackers. If you look at Salah, just because you mentioned him, using him as the example, he had one shot all game and attempted one dribble all game, which was unsuccessful, which is so rare for such the term we like to use, output player. So I think really Salah kind of captures the performance of the Liverpool attack.
Yeah, as you say, Liverpool. I mean, I think a lot of us, when we look at and talk about Jurgen Klopp's side, like to think about, obviously, Salah running in behind, as he's done against Arsenal so many times and playing against defences like that. But I think last year, maybe the evolution we saw of Liverpool beginning to control games with the ball more maybe than what they've done in the past without the ball and their pressing and their intensity like that. Teams are beginning to sit in a lower and deeper block against them. And I think Salah, I don't know if you agree, Dave, he probably is the one player who that suits least. Firmino can drop off and try and pick up spaces and link balls through. And we've seen Mane with even his aerial prowess from Trent Alexander-Arnold crosses from the right, something that Liverpool were lacking, of course. He can adapt as well. But Salah seems to sort of struggle to find a new way of breaking opponents down.
Yeah, I think Salah's a player that you don't really, as a defender side, you don't want to be 1v1 with because he's a fantastic dribbler. He's obviously a willing shooter from anywhere on the pitch as well. Anywhere within reason, obviously the final third. But so yeah, he's kind of someone who, if he gets in those positions and if he is bestowed just a little bit of space, he can punish you. But as I said, it doesn't seem to be that many teams are allowing it. We saw little bits of this in the second half of last season. A lot of that was games post the title win, but there did just look to be a few struggles, and this is why I've spoke a lot about potential evolution required this season in terms of how Liverpool play. There's no doubt that they've been They were the best side in the country last season. They were probably the joint best side in the country the season before. To miss out on a point is really difficult. I just think now, though, sides are just starting to find answers. I don't want to get, I don't want to go too far. I don't want to be too extreme in my response to this because, at the end of the day, it's so early. We haven't even started the Premier League season yet. But I'm just looking ahead, and I think even in the second half, we expected Arsenal to really tire, and they did, and obviously they were sitting in. Liverpool by far the better team. They looked a lot more threatening, but they still just couldn't take advantage. Did that equalising goal come in the final 20 minutes of the match? And the Mane chance for me, that got the highest XG on the day. It was just under 0.6. It was a big chance, but that comes through Arsenal being a little bit higher up the pitch and a through ball that he can latch onto behind, and that goes on to be the biggest chance. So when it comes to actually breaking down that low block, there was struggles with it, and Klopp said it himself, didn't he? Klopp said after the game, we need to improve, and we need to. He was a little bit. I think he said, actually get the quote up because I've got it here. He said, "Today I was sad when you play against a formation like this, which has happened to us pretty much always. Not only when we are 1-0 down, but even when it's 0-0. A lot of teams like to play like this, so we need to be a lot more fresher and dangerous inside the final third." I think that says a lot.
Yeah, I think it does sum it up as well. Before we get on to the evolution of things and maybe how Jurgen Klopp can tweak things, I want to just speak about the man who was missing really for Liverpool, Trent Alexander-Arnold. And maybe I suppose this game goes to highlight just how elite he and Andy Robertson are, because we talk an awful lot about how many assists that they get from fullback, and it's almost now become taken for granted. But looking at the sort of attacks map for Liverpool, and it was 40% of attacks went down the left. Andy Robertson did get in an awful lot. I think he posted an XA expected assists. Spoken about him in the role maybe for the Arsenal goal, and probably that might have been a bit harsh. But if you look at the sort of attacks map, 23 attacks, 40% for Liverpool down the left-hand side, 17 down the right. So that worked out at 35%. And Nico Williams, I wouldn't say he embarrassed himself, not by any stretch whatsoever. He posted expected assists of 0.11. But I suppose that goes to show, whilst Williams was probably what you'd expect from a right fullback, Trent Alexander-Arnold really is that sort of step above, and Liverpool did miss him.
Yeah, well, he's arguably in the top 2-3 in the world in the position, and I think he certainly, even if he's not maybe creating, because people seem so aware of the threat he has. I think he just gives you something to think about, even if you, as a defender, you're thinking, where is he now as this attacks build? Where is he going to come into the move? Nico Williams looks like he's going to be a really good player. He's a good understudy. Probably still a little bit young in terms of what he can offer, but you can see why Klopp likes him, why he uses him. But he's not Trent Alexander-Arnold, certainly not at this stage. And as I said, I think when you're coming up against sides who are going to sit in, not give you that much space inside their own half, you need different forms of attack, because you can't just rely on the front three because they don't have that much room. Normally I thought last season Liverpool faced that formation a lot, and when teams were sitting in and nullifying the front three, Robertson, Trent Alexander-Arnold, they were bringing in the threat from elsewhere, and it was probably a little bit lopsided in the game on Saturday, where you were kind of more relying on that left side with Robertson. I think that's eventually maybe why Klopp obviously he's chasing the game. I think he feels like he needs to change it. Williams comes off, he puts Gomez out there, and he tries to get Minamino on there. Keita come on as well. Players who are maybe a little bit, can make things happen with the ball at the feet, pull players out of position. I think we're probably gonna have to see a little bit more of that next year, where having a couple more offensive players on the pitch, you can just kind of intricate passes or intricate moves, good footwork, just to bring other players out of position.
Yeah, the joy, I suppose, of Liverpool's attacking formation is with the two fullbacks and the wide players. It really does sort of stretch oppositions to their breaking point, and then they can't cope. But when you've got one of those missing, all of a sudden, as you say, it is lopsided. It is all over on the left. And Robertson did play very well, and on another day, I'm sure would have had an assist if Mo Salah hadn't been sort of caught on his heels at the back post a couple of times. But then let's get into the evolution, then the tactical changes that Jurgen Klopp started making. Keita and Minamino come on. Minamino's taken plenty of praise, and quite rightly so, but I suppose it does show that Liverpool could do with that, I suppose, option through the middle of the pitch. So they had a three-pronged attack if you look at it going forward, where Trent on the right, Robertson on the left, but they do also have someone who in the middle can unpick a defence as well.
Are you talking about who are you talking about there? Sorry,
I'm just sort of saying in terms of just the overarching thing for Liverpool. Is that the next step of the evolution? I know.
Yeah. My apologies.
Saturday, Minamino came on, played off the left, but he did play sort of in half spaces as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just the reason you said that. I was wondering whether you referenced the likes of Minamino or Keita, someone like that who has that just a bit more offensive threat from central locations. But yeah, I'll be honest. I thought Minamino done well. He looked. I don't know if it was just eyes deceiving us, but he just looked a little bit stronger as well. I think if you could probably not criticise him at all, but if there's one thing you've noticed since he's come in January, he's looked very lightweight for this division. And I think that's maybe why he hasn't had the impact that Liverpool fans would have been hoping for. But certainly in this game, I thought he did look a little bit more dangerous. I thought he looked a little bit stronger. I thought he finished his goal well, and he obviously gambles on running in to follow the ball, and little things that you may miss. But if he doesn't make that run, he doesn't get to finish it. I'm not too sure about Mane playing in midfield. I think he was almost like a right-sided number 8, wasn't he? For me, I think I know he had one of his quieter games, but he still had something like 4 shots too, which were on target. And he's always a threat for me, Mane. I'm just not sure. Maybe he's nullified a little bit in that central position. But then we switched to the 4-2-3-1 later on. And I remember in the last game against Arsenal, they switched to this 4-2-3-1, but you had players like Origi and stuff coming in, and it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel like a team for the future. Then I guess it was a little bit, square pegs round holes type. But this 4-2-3-1 that they finished with did seem a little bit more natural. You had obviously the back 4. You had 2 sitting in the middle. Keita one of them. Wijnaldum was the other. We don't know whether he's going to be here next year. Then you had Mane on the right, Jones through the middle, Minamino on the left, and Salah up top. And I think in terms of a front 4, that has a lot of potential to be quite dangerous next year. Don't know what your thoughts are, Guy.
Yeah, no, I thought actually Minamino, for, I don't know if it's harsh to say, the first time really in his stay at Liverpool, looked a really potent and dangerous option coming on. I mean, before he'd come on, James Milner, I think it was effectively Liverpool's second most dangerous player, looking at the numbers and things. But I think that position on the left-hand side, a lot of talk's been going on. Obviously, Liverpool were linked with Timo Werner. That deal didn't happen. Who could maybe deputise for Mane on the left-hand side, or if Mane even maybe went through the middle as a focal point or went off to the right in a 4-2-3-1, who could play on that left-hand side? And for me, I think Minamino maybe found a home in that position. And as you say, I think the 4-2-3-1, I'm sort of in two minds, to be honest, David, whether Jurgen Klopp switched to that because he felt that was the right course of attack, or as you've already referenced before, Arsenal were really tiring. And I think he saw, right, we're 1 goal behind. We need to throw the kitchen sink at it. And in the end, obviously, Arsenal couldn't really cope. Liverpool kind of bulldozed their way through for the goal. It wasn't pretty, but it got the job done. And interesting to see, actually, how much trust he got in that formation to maybe go with it from the start in any games coming up once the Premier League season does get underway.
Yeah. It's something me and Josh have talked about a few times on the show, so people might recognise the conversation. But I think it's just a little bit more offensive, isn't it? And certainly, as we're talking about, when you're facing sides, you're just sitting back. There's no point having such a kind of conservative middle 3. You need someone else in there, like an extra attacker, just to help break things down. We think Klopp was potentially kind of, when he first come in, looking at maybe a 4-2-3-1, judging by the players Liverpool getting linked with. he's obviously come away from that in the 4-3-3. He's been, phenomenal tactic, really. It's been at times unbeatable. But I just think in certain games, let's think about the side next year. I really like them, but we'll just use these as an example because they seem quite traditional. If you're playing Burnley at Anfield, you're going to see a lot of the ball. You have a lot of territory, so you're going to need that extra kind of threat from the middle. It might be why so many people are really desperate to see Liverpool get Thiago in, because he has got a little bit more of a penetrating threat. Think of that ball he played in the Champions League final, which led to the goal. Keita has got that, but it's just if we can get Keita regularly in the side. But you can see maybe why he would opt to go towards the 4-2-3-1. It just might depend on the opponent. It might be maybe a fluctuation between the two throughout the season.
Yeah, I don't know about you as well, though. I think that could be maybe exciting for a player like Firmino, because of course when he first came in, Jurgen Klopp sort of said he'd struggled because at Monaco he'd always played in a 2. Now obviously he's got used to playing in that 6 role, but he does play a fair few vertical passes, usually finding someone like Andy Robertson charging down the left and crosses. I'm pretty sure the equaliser at Old Trafford came from Firmino finding Robertson, and then obviously Lallana came in at the far post off the top of my head. I think that one was. But also we've seen with the goals, and albeit it's only 2 against Man City and Crystal Palace at Anfield last season, that Firmino done a bit of a shot on him. So if he moved maybe into an anchor role, and Jordan Henderson, I don't think you can underplay importance to Liverpool, but almost if his role became the one that was shifted forward, so rather than looking at that left of a 3 all the time as having to be the creative player or attacking like midfielder who came into the system, Wijnaldum may be round for another year. He can obviously play that shuttling role, but even if Thiago came in, they're not the same player, but in a 4-2-3-1, that might suit Thiago more than Wijnaldum, being a double pivot and trying to link and play creative passes. And whilst Henderson isn't getting any younger, it would be an evolution to move past him. You'd have to find another player in the side to G the team up quite like Henderson does. But I don't know what your thoughts on that. Just when you were speaking, that was sort of how I would see that potentially playing out.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. I think it's a really good point. And you do talk about, certain players get moved on, overlooking them. It's quite difficult. But I do believe if you look at this side now, it maybe not this year, but we are coming to, I think, a transition period where some players are probably going to start moving on out of this kind of elite group. Although they're only, late 20s, but we're just starting, a few are touching that kind of 30 mark. And I think the great side, your United, under Ferguson stuff, they always kind of preempted these changes coming and set the kind of wheels in motion to make it as seamless as possible. I think Liverpool are kind of, when it comes to recruitment and planning next steps, probably the best one of the best in Europe. So yeah, I think what you've said there, it is interesting. I mean, look, it could be way off. If Klopp was on the conversation now, you might say I've got no intentions of changing any formation or any way of playing, because it was such, dominated the Premier League for 2 years doing it. So we could be way off. But as I said, it just feels like it's very rare you see a top side, certainly England, kind of stick to the same structure, routine formations for beyond 2-3 years, because teams seem to find a bit of a response to it. And I also think on top of that, and this is a point Josh has made, Liverpool haven't really recruited over the last year or 18 months, have they? They haven't really brought in any huge names, and I think that can, when you bring in a big player, it can lift the squad. It can kind of give other options and just freshen things up a little bit. That hasn't happened. We don't know if that's going to happen this summer, but it could all just be in danger of becoming a little bit. I'm not being negative. I'm just trying to explain why I think we could see a change. It could become a little bit stale, I think, if we didn't see any new names and we just saw the same kind of formation and player roles and things. So I guess that's why I'm kind of preempting that we might see some sort of adaptation with the players like Sam Minamino and Keita start playing more regularly.
Yeah, and I think the 4-2-3-1 as well. I personally think it suits someone like Minamino down the ground, and I think off that left-hand side he'd be a brilliant player. But then I suppose you've got the real dilemma of what happens on the right. Of course, a couple of seasons ago when Klopp did do it, Salah, after that first breakout season, he hadn't started the following season as well. The pressure maybe, was he a one-season wonder? He's dispelled that myth, so let's not go there. But he was put through the middle almost as the opportunity to be that output player and be at the top end of the pitch. But I don't know about you, but for me now, and looking even at the XG from the Community Shield game, and albeit he ended up on the right-hand side of a midfield three at one stage, but Sadio Mane seems to have taken on that role. And I think actually, as a number 9 almost, as it were, I think he's probably got the skill set to play that role. He's physical, albeit for quite a small player. He's good in the air, and we know obviously what he can do when he does get a chance in on goal. But then I suppose Salah would have to adapt his role off the right because he wouldn't be as advanced as he is in a 4-3-3.
Yeah, I think so. I love Mane. I think it depends who you like, what type of player you like, because Mane and Salah are different players. For me, I'd probably go with Mane, but I can't see the appeal behind Salah, just in terms as a player. But I think the reason why maybe Salah is better suited to the 9 is that thing that we often talk about with him, that he's just such an output player. I think Mane's probably the better finisher. People might argue with that, but I just, he tends to shoot less than Salah,
Yeah.
but he's normally a bit more accurate when he does. I think part of the appeal, some may see it as a negative, but I think it's the appeal. Part of the appeal with Salah is the high output. So he might, sometimes you see Salah take his shot and it can look a little bit naff, a little bit weak, straight down the middle, and it's a little bit frustrating. But he tends to have, 3 or 4 shots per game, and it's that high output that results in his high amount of goals. But I think if you were to only be giving him 1 or 2 shots a game, you could see a dramatic kind of fall in his goal return. So I do think he's a player who has a lot of shots, but you also need to create a lot for him. Whereas I think Mane can be a little bit more selective, maybe need less shot in a game to score. So that's why I'd probably maintain having a real output player like Salah up top, and let Mane kind of do his work elsewhere. Obviously, don't forget when he first came, he was on the right of the midfield, wasn't at Liverpool, and he had Coutinho on the left. So really versatile, which is something that people kind of forget with Mane. You can't just see him as this left side of the attacker now, but he was for a long time all right.
He certainly was, and for me, I would like to maybe see him go through the middle for a bit of time. But I suppose through the middle, then there is a bit of a conversation to be had around Roberto Firmino, and I'm sure this will go on through the course of the season. But the game really sort of summed up to me on Saturday, Dave, with what Liverpool have at number 9 at the moment. He's a very good link player, but in terms of stepping up at the crucial moments with crucial goals, he so often does against Arsenal. I think if you look at Aubameyang's goal, I think that rated with XG at 0.06. So that very much is an elite finish from an elite level player. And without wanting to try and criticise Roberto Firmino for missing an XG chance with 0.5 value to it. I think early in the second half, he had a shot from a very similar position outside the box that he tried to curl into that bottom corner like Aubameyang had done, but missed the target. And I suppose, obviously, with his goal record at Anfield last season hanging over his head, there probably is going to be a bit of talk around Firmino. We've spoken about Salah, we've spoken about Mane. Probably only right we do have a bit of a chat on Firmino. Yeah,
so Firmino's so interested, isn't he? Because he's a number 9. No, I think he's number 9 shirt number, isn't he? But obviously he plays number 9, but in reality, he's more of a number 10, isn't he? The position they occupy. If you have a look at the maps, he's basically playing like a number 10. So I suppose you could argue that maybe Liverpool missed that out and out traditional goal scorer through the middle, which preempting maybe Brewster might be that. So it's hard. I don't think one needs to be purchased. I think in my opinion, you go with Brewster next year, and you kind of alternate for whatever you need. And so Firmino is all about coming short, linking up the play. He's basically, as I said, he's a number 10 without getting the credit for it. So I don't know if we can be. I don't know where to stand in terms of criticising from a goal scoring point of view. I don't think he's ever going to be a player who'll, certainly at Liverpool, who maybe get 20 plus goals. But I think that's a lot to do with the system as well as his own finishing abilities. I think just the way he drops off and stuff, it's really difficult to just be, always in that right place at the right time to be getting shots off. I mean, it'd be interesting. Let me just bring him up now to see how many shots he averaged per 90 last season. Because I imagine I'll keep my mouth shut as if I look first, but yeah, so he's averaging around 2.6, which is a little bit high therefore. Then if we compare that to Salah, so obviously Firmino was averaging 2.6 shots per 90 last season in the Premier League. But yeah, Salah's 3.7, so he doesn't get as many shots on goal, Firmino. So it's just really difficult, Guy, to kind of summarise where I stand on him. I think he's integral to the team, and there's kind of the things that he does in terms of his attack and play maybe makes it worthwhile having him on the pitch, even if he isn't going to score as many as a top class number 9, traditional number 9 would.
Yeah, you mentioned Curtis Jones before, but the reason I'm sort of saying that as well, though, is with 4-2-3-1 may be an answer going forward. And of course, Firmino did do it the year that Liverpool won the Champions League and did get 97 points in the Premier League. So by no means, as you say, throw the baby out with the water. It's one of them where I just wonder in that number 10 role, he plays that false 9 where he drops off and then vacates the space in behind. If there's a focal point ahead of him, that link work he does, I suppose teams in a low block know they can sit there because there's still going to be a forward player occupying the defenders.
Yeah, it is. It is difficult to see what you do with that. But as I said, it may not even go to the 4-2-3-1. It may just be. It may maintain as it is. If they did, maybe it could be a rotation between like Jones coming in there, depending on the opposition, and Firmino playing there. I think the good thing is, just quickly on Jones, I think he's going to be a really good option for Liverpool this year. He doesn't look like you're trying to bed in an academy player. He looks like a player who comes in and kind of makes a difference. So he could kind of be that player that they've been missing if they do want to change things a little bit. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out across the course of the season. We'll have to wait and see, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose that is the only answer we're going to get by actually waiting and seeing what does play out. Well, that's the Community Shield taken care of then, and any potential tactical evolution for Jurgen Klopp's side. Coming up next, though, we will welcome our first ever guest to Analysing Anfield. For the second half then of this week's episode, we've got our first ever guest on Analysing Anfield with us. I'm excited to say that Lee Scott, well-known analyst, and of course, I'll get into author of King Klopp, Rebuilding the Liverpool Dynasty, is here with us. First and foremost, Lee, thanks for your time and thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Guy. How are you? It's really, really good to come on. I'm really happy here.
Yeah, no, great to have you. And we're keeping thanks. So looking then, we're going to get into plenty of stuff. Your sort of background, Lee, talking obviously about Liverpool and the book, but Dave knows you very well. We just met, and in terms of our listenership, I'm sure a number of them do know about yourself. But in terms of those who may not have seen work, what is your background?
I've got a bit of a strange background, I think, to a point within football. I got a break working with Hibernian in Scottish football as a scout for the first team initially. That led to a move to St Mirren, another Scottish team, to work as opposition analyst and scout, and then on to Partick Thistle finally to work as their opposition analyst before I kind of came out of football in that sense. Now my work, my day job, is working with Total Football Analysis on the consultancy side of the business. So we do a lot of work with clubs, with agents and different things that put together reports on players, opposition analysis. And of course, with that, I've also had the time to write a couple of books so far. So yeah, everything seems to be going well, but it's kind of a strange route around football, if you like.
Yeah, I must say, Lee, obviously I've read a lot of your work. in various places. And I know you've been really supportive of Analysing Anfield as well, so we do appreciate that. Yeah, it's probably a good time just to briefly. You mentioned the books there. So you've brought out this really exciting book, King Klopp, Rebuilding the Liverpool Dynasty. Just before we start, I'm right in saying that you're not actually a Liverpool fan, are you?
I'm not. The
No.
only team that I actually support is Aberdeen up here in Scotland. Other than that, I tend to do what a lot of people do. I follow coaches and players that I'm interested in more than anything else, I think.
Yeah. I mean, on that basis, you can see the appeal. Obviously, I know you've wrote a book about Pep and Man City, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's obvious, really, why you've, I guess, kind of on that basis, you've looked at Liverpool under Jurgen Klopp, because it's been quite a roller coaster these last few years. Obviously, peaking with Champions League and the Premier League. So, but with that in mind, how did the idea of the book come about?
I think that obviously, I've been really interested in Jurgen Klopp since his time at Borussia Dortmund. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I followed him much or knew much about him initially when he was at Mainz, but certainly that Dortmund side that was so exciting with their high tempo, heavy metal football, as he christened it himself. I think that when he moved to English football, to a club like Liverpool, it just made so much sense from a cultural point of view, from a connection to the city and the team point of view, and then we saw him evolve his tactical style from everyone. When Klopp first signed, everyone was talking about gegenpressing. That was everywhere. Every article that you read had reference of gegenpressing, and Liverpool are going to gegenpress and what that meant. But I think over the years that Klopp has been at Liverpool, we've seen him kind of evolve his tactical style, and that's something that really caught my eye, because I like coaches who learn and are willing to change, especially at the top level where the pressure is so big. He's got the courage, if you like, to change the way that he does things and what he asks from his players. And I think over this last season, we kind of saw the next evolution of that with Liverpool moving to more of a controlling style of play. And that's something that I felt I really needed to write about in a long form fashion. So that's why I decided to put together the book, I think.
Yeah. You're absolutely spot on. And, obviously I see a lot of your work, and I'm sure many people on Twitter will as well. If anyone is wondering, you can find Leon at FM Analysis. He's got quite the following on there. There's a lot of good work that he shares. But I'm just curious because, obviously you've got your finger firm on the pulse in terms of, the kind of analysis work out there within football. So for a book like this, what sort of research and preparation goes into write it? How long is the process? Bearing in mind that you probably have a decent idea of the kind of principles you're going to be covering.
Yeah, I think that the process for something like this, same when I was looking at Pep Guardiola, but definitely with Jurgen Klopp and Liverpool, the process of actually writing the book only takes me a couple of months. I'm quite used to writing. I'm a quick writer. I can kind of sit down and block things out and write a chapter in a few hours. So it's relatively fast to do that. I think that the main thing was just to see as much of Liverpool as I could, and then to do enough research, if you like. And this podcast was one of my main pieces of research to make sure that I listened to every episode. I listened to a couple of times, because the points that you and Josh make are so good around Liverpool and what they're trying to do, and what's good and what's bad in the Liverpool system. From that point on, like you say, I had an idea from watching Liverpool of what they did, but it was just making sure that I could draw out the intricacies. So, yeah, we could talk about the movement of the three. Everyone see that. We could talk about the importance of Trent Alexander-Arnold when he gets the ball in the half space and his passing range. Everyone could see that. But then I think the most interesting aspect for me was pulling apart midfield, and the fact that they were so different, the three midfielders. When you take Wijnaldum, Fabinho and Henderson as the midfielders, you have Henderson, who operates in chaos. He presses, he runs up to the penalty area, supports the attack, and then you have Fabinho and Wijnaldum, who are perhaps more nuanced, but their role, I think, was really interesting for Liverpool under Jurgen Klopp last season. And I think that was kind of something that I maybe took a little bit more time to to research and had to watch a few things back a few times before I really understood, I think, what they were trying to do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, two things. Firstly, we definitely never told Lee or paid Lee to say that on the show. That was authentic. I hope anyway. But I don't. Have you got to just briefly, Lee? I don't know how many Liverpool fans you follow or how much you see, but have you noticed that there does seem to be a bit of a dismissive attitude a little bit to Wijnaldum over these past few weeks,
Yeah.
with the obviously Thiago maybe waiting in the wings, and it is really interesting. I'm so glad that you mentioned it about his importance to the side, because although he's not the guy who's stealing headlines with great goals, great assists, he is integral to that side, and he's been so important to a Premier League winning and Champions League winning team.
He definitely has. I think that it's natural, I think, to a point at a club like Liverpool that in the off-season fans will start to look at the squad and they'll pick apart the players who maybe don't seem to be as contributing as much. If you look at the stats, even the underlying metrics to a point on Wijnaldum, you can look at some of those and you can question his output, but that's because a lot of what Wijnaldum gives Liverpool against the ball, so possession, is hard to quantify because he isn't aggressive in the press. He doesn't have a great deal of regains and interceptions, but what he does is he blocks passing lanes so intelligently that he stops the opposition from progressing the ball on his side of the field. So whereas Jordan Henderson, who we've already talked about, operates at chaos and he will press and press and press and counter press and try and win the ball back. And if you're watching that game, you can see Jordan Henderson pressing and pressing, trying to win the ball back. But then Wijnaldum is so good with his positioning that sometimes the opposition just simply don't try to play past him. I think there was one game last season, I remember, I think it was against Leicester City, when Soyuncu and Chilwell were really progressing the ball well down their left-hand side, and Henderson was getting bypassed when he pressed. They were just playing around him. And I think Liverpool switched Wijnaldum to play on the other side, so they switched Wijnaldum and Henderson. And all of a sudden, Soyuncu and Chilwell couldn't progress the ball anymore because Wijnaldum was taking up such good positions. I think that's the kind of thing that almost goes unnoticed, if you like. And I think that obviously the Thiago links are huge. If Thiago comes in, he adds a different dimension to Liverpool midfield. But I think that Liverpool fans really need to appreciate just how important Wijnaldum has been over the course of these last two seasons. And I'm sure that Jurgen Klopp recognises that.
Just before I assume, Guy, I would say you've probably got a few questions of your own, so I'll keep it brief. But just on that point, it makes me feel almost as if there's maybe the blind spots in the data for people who are using that to try and quantify impact. And the point you just talked about in that Leicester game is really important. That's not always going to be picked up within numbers. But as I said, he is integral. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, all I wanted to ask you about, Lee, was the man himself, Jurgen Klopp. Obviously, you've titled the book King Klopp, and you've written the book on Pep Guardiola as well. And one thing that fascinates me is sort of how these ideologies get passed down. We know Pep Guardiola, it's clear to see Barcelona, Ajax, that Johan Cruyff and Rinus Michels total football idea. But with Jurgen Klopp, it does seem to be a complete contrast where he's kind of worked this on the job himself, but he seems to have really come across a unique tactical system that now everyone else is trying to sort of replicate and copy.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that Klopp, to a point, when you talk about the fact that Klopp obviously developed within German football, and a lot of the ideas in German football in modern days anyway kind of stem from Ralf Rangnick, who just left a post with the Red Bull group and was close to taking over AC Milan as he wanted to be a coach and director of football at the club, which is perhaps why Milan turned their back a little bit. And Rangnick has been linked with a lot of moves to England as well, I think. But Rangnick was the first one who kind of stepped away from the German stereotype of playing with a libero, a sweeper behind the defensive line, and he introduced this idea of pressing and marking systems that were different to what was used previously. And I think that Klopp has adopted a lot of these ideas, but then, of course, he's taken these ideas and almost supercharged them. So you had that Borussia Dortmund team who gegenpressed, they counter-pressed so aggressively. There were times when they had the ball that they would deliberately pass the ball into the corners of the pitch just so they could allow the opposition to have the ball, and then they could press them to win the ball back. And I think that the move to English football, a lot of people expected to see that game model almost transferred wholesale into Liverpool. But I think that what Klopp has done so well is that he has adapted his game to the English game extremely well. So in this last season, I think the move of Trent Alexander-Arnold to start playing inverted, playing the half spaces, it was designed to allow Liverpool to have more control and possession. So they weren't constantly attacking in quick transitions anymore. There were more moments when Liverpool would dominate the opposition and just press them back and then work from there. I think that every season we've seen a slightly different tweak to this Liverpool game model, and that speaks really highly of Klopp. I think that's why he's so keen on getting a player like Thiago, because Thiago is potentially the next evolution to this Liverpool side.
And I think just sort of continuing on that sort of Klopp Guardiola thing of how they're different. You don't see sort of what happened with City in the Champions League always happen with Liverpool very often, where Klopp gets accused of overthinking things. Once he's got a tactical plan, you sort of feel as though it is robust. Not from the point he rolls it out, as we said there, is gegenpressing and things have evolved and changed like that. But for example, he must have been thinking of Trent to a more dominant position in those half spaces for a little while, and then when he does it, it seems as though the balance of the squad is right and the team is ready to implement that.
Yeah, the balance is key, and that was something that was really, really impressive, because obviously they move Trent inside and then they lose width on the right-hand side because Salah's not going to stay wide all the time. He likes to come inside almost to the centre-forward position, more or less. And so the plan was to push Trent inside for Jordan Henderson to move from that central space almost to a right wing position. And it's those little intricacies within the system that make everything work so well. But we got to the point, I think, towards the end of before the breakup for the COVID outbreak, where teams were almost, you could see that teams knew what Liverpool were going to do. But it's one thing to know how they're going to play and what they're going to do, but their execution and the quality of an individual level of their players was so high that it becomes extremely, extremely difficult for teams to stop them. The only two that I can really think of, other than the games that they lost, and it's the Watford game, which was a loss. But before that, the only teams that really sussed them out for me were Napoli in the first group stage of the Champions League match when Carlo Ancelotti was the coach, and he set up an almost a 4-2-4 and kept attacking players on the full-backs and centre-backs of Liverpool. Couldn't progress the ball past them. And then Sheffield United, where Chris Wilder set up so well defensively in that first match. I think Gini Wijnaldum ended up sneaking a ball past Dean Henderson for the only goal of the game. But those coaches kind of the only ones that came up with a way to fully stifle Liverpool. Every other coach knew what they were going to do, but the quality of the Liverpool players is so high and the execution was so good, and that's what came through, I think.
Yeah, I did. I was going to speak about this a little bit later on, but I think given the conversation we're having now, it's a really good time to bring it up. Obviously, I was going to ask your thoughts on maybe Liverpool's prospects for the season ahead. Can they retain the title? Can they go again in Europe? But just on that point, maybe before you comment on that, I'm just keen to see if you think there may be another tactical evolution this year. Something we were talking about on this half of the show. Mainly just to freshen things up, given that there may be a lack of recruitment again. But also, I'm just of the opinion a little bit that teams potentially start to not necessarily suss Liverpool out, because I still think they'll win 90% of the games, even if they carried on playing as they are. But I do just think a lot more sides are doing a good job of nullifying them. I thought Arsenal done quite well on Saturday, sitting in and just looking to it on the counter. I think it's really difficult for Liverpool's attackers to function when they haven't got that space in behind. And then, when players who crucial players are missing, such as Trent, who's we've already talked about, some really important. I just wonder whether you think that we may see another evolution on this kind of the 4-3-3 and how they've played and been so successful the past 2 years.
I think that's definitely what Klopp's looking at. I think that teams now know that you nullify the Liverpool fullbacks and then they struggle a little bit to progress the ball, because that midfield, much as it is well balanced, so functional. I mean, Firmino can beat a press with a dribble if you like, but how often is your six going to get the ball in a position where he can beat a man centrally and then engage others and create space that way? So teams sit the fullbacks, and then they learn to sit on Virgil van Dijk as well, because if they sit in the fullbacks and leave Van Dijk open, Van Dijk will step into midfield and cause an overload there, and then Liverpool can progress the ball that way. So if teams take both of those options away, that's where Liverpool really start to struggle. I think you're right, Arsenal at the weekend did well. They kept space. They were very compact defensively, so Firmino couldn't really find space centrally to receive the ball. Because he couldn't receive the ball, space wasn't really in behind him, and so the wide attackers couldn't attack that space like they normally would. I think that the sensible evolution and why they're looking so closely at signing Thiago is to add a progressive player into the middle of the park. For my money, I think that Liverpool would love for Naby Keita to be able to be fit for the whole season, because he gives you that progressive option in the central areas. He's a player who's capable of playing the same kind of pass that Thiago does. Not the same quality, because they're very different players, and that Thiago has very few peers in world football in terms of his passing range and passing vision, maybe only Kevin De Bruyne now. But Naby Keita does give you the ability to pressure in central areas through either carrying the ball and dribbling or playing those passes through the lines. I don't think Jurgen Klopp and Liverpool are convinced that they can rely on him to be fit for the long term over a full season. And that's why they're looking to add a player in that central area who can pass that ball, who can play the ball that breaks the lines of the opposition, that kind of opens the game up when the other options are taken away. And I think that that's the next sensible approach. And I really like the addition of Takumi Minamino. I think that his ability and the positions that he takes up to receive the ball, whether he plays from the right or he plays as the 9, I think that he gives something different, but I think that'll be more off the bench. I think that the next evolution has to come in 3 central fielders.
Yeah, I agree. I thought Minamino, we actually talked about him a little bit earlier. He just looked a lot more imposing. Even physically, he looked a little bit stronger. Yeah, I thought, when he come in January, the one thing you probably say over this initial few months, pre and post the COVID break, was he just looked a little bit lightweight for this division. He definitely looked a bit, stronger, and I thought he had a good little cameo on the weekend, which is, he looked confident as well, which is going to be good news for Liverpool, because he could be important this season. We'll go back onto the book. Obviously, without revealing too much, because at the end of the day, we want people to go and buy the book because it's fantastic. But if you kind of had to touch on maybe, I don't know, one or two instrumental things that have happened over the past 2-3 years, whether that be a tactical change, recruitment of certain players, what would you say has really been key for the success of this Liverpool side?
I think that with everything Liverpool have achieved, what's really stood out for me is that they've always kept, there's a lot of rotations and a lot of movement that we've kind of already touched upon. So we see Mane and Salah moving from wide to central positions, see Henderson moving wide, Alexander-Arnold moving into the half space. All of these things are really important about how Liverpool play. But I think the key thing is that they still have these really important reference points centrally. So I think the signing is an obvious one, but signing of Virgil van Dijk gives Liverpool that reference point at the base of the attack when they're in possession. He's always available to receive the ball. He can beat a man through dribbling past him. He can play a pass between the lines. But also ahead of that, the reference point of Fabinho, I think Pep Linders has already talked about him at one point and called him the lighthouse of this Liverpool team, because he's the reference point. He's always there. And he's kind of the reference point around which all chaos happens in terms of rotations and movements. And I think that having a player like Fabinho, but who sits in front of Virgil van Dijk, it gives Liverpool a really, really solid base through which everything else can attack. And I kind of tried to touch in the book upon the importance of the 6 in this Liverpool system, and explain how that player's used to release pressure and then to join the attack at late moments when he takes positions in the opposite defensive structure that you're expecting him to be there. And suddenly Fabinho's got the ball, and he's got this same ability that Patrick Vieira used to have at Arsenal. He looks like he's about to lose the ball, and before you know it, he's dribbled past 2 players. the opportunities and the the chances that creates for Liverpool by just disrupting the opposition's defensive block, I think, is something that's really important. I think that they caught everybody by surprise with that signing of Firmino, because it came so quickly after the end of the season that there was very little paper talk about it. Just suddenly the club announced that they'd signed Firmino, and this is a player who used to play at right back when he first moved to Europe, who used to play at centre back, and then suddenly 6. And this kind of versatility that a player with that profile gives you is something that I think has been integral for Jurgen Klopp.
Yeah, I think it's really good that you touch on how we actually come in as well, because I always think Liverpool really not only in recruitment in terms of keeping it all in-house. And I mentioned a couple of weeks ago how Marcel Brands, who's the director of football at Everton, was pretty furious that all of Everton's links always seem to be getting leaked to the media. And, obviously the problem is if other clubs are keeping an eye on the same players and they know that a Premier League club's about to make a move, it can often push them to make the same move. And when you haven't got your to offer and things, it's a bit of an issue. But I think Liverpool have always been really good at. I mean, we tend to find out on the day, don't we? As kind of like, even in the media, as fans, we find in a couple of hours that this deal is pretty much done, but we haven't heard anything before that. So I think that's on top of the really good recruitment in terms of picking players to make a move for them, identifying them. I think that process of bringing them in has always been brilliant as well.
On that point as well, Dave, and Lee, your thoughts on this? I think it's impressive how Liverpool keep things in-house, but also how you're speaking there about Firmino from right back, centre back. Of course, he'd been in midfield for Monaco when they'd done so well in the Champions League, but is how Liverpool have seen positions within their team in other players in other teams that they've then brought them in and put them into that position. Mane, a prime example, playing on the right at Southampton, and now he's such a goal-getter on the left, and as you've already alluded to, Firmino in his role.
Yeah, and you can look at Firmino as well. When he was playing at Hoffenheim, he played very much as almost a second striker or even a wide player. And I know that when Firmino first came to Liverpool, Brendan Rodgers maybe didn't fancy him for one reason or another. I think we all have an opinion on exactly why that was, and it might not be anything to do with actual football. But when he first came to Liverpool, he played the left-hand side for Liverpool. If you told me, I mean, I was a great fan of his when he was at Hoffenheim. I was really following that Hoffenheim team closely because they had a number of really interesting players. But if you told me that he would one day play as the number 9 for an English side who would win the Champions League and then the Premier League title, I wouldn't have believed you, because he doesn't have the profile of a number 9. He's got the profile of a 10. But he's such an intelligent player, and him coming into the position and being put in a role with players like Salah and Mane, they all work so well and together because they have individual player profiles that fit so well. Both of those wide attackers to come inside, but Firmino's happy coming, but everything clicks. I think that having players within your squad that can play in more than one position is extremely important. I do think that eventually, maybe not this season, but eventually we are going to see a time when Alexander-Arnold has played in the field. Just almost as it could be covered if there's injuries, it could be an experiment against a team with a lower profile, but I do think that'll happen. I still see his long-term position as right back because you can't really take away how effective he is from there, but I think that Liverpool would really value having the positional flexibility within the squad to do different things. So I think that if you're talking about squad building and recruitment in the modern game, it is so important to have players who can do different things for you because it gives you so much more flexibility going forward.
Yeah, I mean, Firmino, perfect example of that. We know that Liverpool probably require another centre-back with Lovren departing, but, in Firmino, you got a player who can play in his traditional 6 role, but then he can also fill in as a centre-back and do that job quite adequately. He done that against Arsenal. I remembered it a few times last season. In fact, if I remember correctly, he may have done it in the League Cup game against Arsenal Anfield, where they finished 5-5 when a few changes were required.
I'm not sure Jurgen Klopp will want that defensive display all the time, Dave, but take your point.
The worst example possible, but it's just reiterating Lee's point, really, that versatility is so key. Obviously, having players who can play multiple roles will be important. Before we wrap up, Lee, this is the most important part. Where can people buy the book?
You can find it on Amazon, on Book Depository, or in the bookshop now. It should be fully released everywhere. And if you do pick it up, then thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we fully endorse it, and if possible, we'll check with Guy. But if we can maybe pop a link in on the YouTube video, if that's possible, right?
Yeah, no, and in the description for the podcast. Lee, thanks a lot for joining. It's been absolutely great to get you on the podcast.
No worries at all. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Great stuff. Well, that wraps up then this session of Analysing Anfield, as we've had our first ever guest. As Dave says, the link to Lee's book will be in the description of the podcast. As to Dave, will be a link to your Analytic 5 newsletter, if you want to give that one a plug yourself.
Yeah, again. But we talked about this before, but it's just it's a newsletter that covers different tactical trends, interesting players, analytical content in general. It's not just about Liverpool, although Liverpool do tend to feature being the side that they are. But you can find a link to sign up on my Twitter, in my bio. There's also a Analyst 5 Twitter account as well. Goes out saying it's completely free to sign up, and it'll just be in your inbox every day in the evening for you to have a little read.
Great stuff. Well, that rounds us off for Analysing Anfield then. From myself, Guy Clarke, Dave Hughes and Lee Scott. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you later.